I wanted to take a little risk for the sake of more variety. The only fighting game we ever covered was Garou, Mark of the Wolves. And that's because while I enjoy playing fighting games once in a while, it's mostly the games I have nostalgia for. And I'm not good at any of them. And I do have nostalgia for Darkstalkers. If any fighting game fits the Halloween season, it's this one. Well, any entry the series does, but I once again wanted to play a Sega Saturn game. I will always take a chance with a good Saturn game.
Damn! If you like the Saturn so much, why don't you marry it?
Well, I really would if I could. Vampire Savior is the last entry that is considered a true sequel. It's called Vampire Savior because in Japan the series is actually called Vampire. And you know, I tend to prefer sticking with the original names and terminologies, but Vampire is just not a good name by comparison. A lot of entries were made since, including Darkstalkers Resurrection, but they are seen more as remixes and variations of this or previous games, sometimes missing some of the characters for no reason. On first glance, you might think this is like Street Fighter Alpha, but with a wacky horror theme. It's actually very different from Street Fighter. I'm not even going to attempt to touch on the narrative, because as you can see, this port was never released in English, and I can barely identify a handful of the kanji in the text. But the sequence of stages you go through in the arcade mode do seem to follow a plot towards the end. Every character has their own subplot with an ending that you're allowed to see in full, even at the lowest difficulty, which I appreciate since this game is incredibly difficult for a casual player. Before I begin to talk about the gameplay, I want to make it very clear I'm not a competitive fighting game player, and I have no interest in dedicating 40 plus hours to the same fighting game to learn all the nuances and technicalities. I'm a very casual fighter. I play a game, I talk about the game. That's the basic concept behind my channel and the self-imposed rule I follow regarding my video creation. I'm not going to have the same level of analytical investment towards every game genre out there like I do towards RPGs or platformers. So here are my impressions as a very casual fighting game player. The game features a pretty big roster of characters. The designs are incredibly varied, and as someone who does 3D art for a living, I think this is Capcom fighting game character design and animation at its very best. Yes, I'm aware Street Fighter 3 is more technically impressive in scale and frame count, but I think the crazy and more surreal animation here is way more interesting. Characters will contort, stretch, dismantle, dissolve, morph and transform beyond what a Looney Tunes cartoon did in the freaking 1930s, and each character uses very different sets of crazy animations. I want to say the animators probably had a lot of fun coming up with the presentation, but the actual work of putting it together must have been brutal. The cast is pretty wild and varied as well, with many characters that become iconic for those who played the Darkstalkers game at least once or know the series exists. You have Dimitri, who is a vampire and might be the closest thing to a protagonist in the series. Morrigan, who is a succubus and probably the most popular character because she's scantily clad and has large boobs. Donovan, who is kind of the most standard looking character in the cast. Baletta, who takes the joke of what if Red Riding Hood had guns too far. Victor, which is the name of the monster, not the doctor, and can grab opponents with his ass. Zabel, which is like a British rockstar zombie. Felicia, who is a filthy cat girl but everyone likes her because she's practically naked. Gallon, who is also among the more recognizable characters and might be responsible for many players' furry awakening. Jeddah, who is another vampire, at least I think it is, and is probably the hardest character to learn. And Albath, who is there if you want to play as one of those mermen that made you fall off a platform in Castlevania games. As a side note, Albath is Brazilian, and that makes him a much better character than Blanca. If you never played the Japanese releases, some of the names might sound wrong to you. Some of the characters have different names depending on if you're playing Vampire or Darkstalkers. For example, Baletta is called BB Hood in Darkstalkers, which is arguably more fitting. While some characters have silly ordinary names like Gallon being called John Talbane, why not change Morrigan to Stacy Highmoon while at it? And some names that are easy to read are changed into complete nonsense, like from Lele to Hsien Ko. Maybe they thought Hsien Ko sounded more Chinese? Overall, I prefer the Japanese names with very few exceptions like BB Hood. The pace feels much more accelerated than Street Fighter Alpha 1 or 2 at the very least. The game favors aggressive play, and the only downtime you get is the short break between rounds. Well, I call them rounds, but once a character's life bar is depleted, there is only a very short break and they're back on their feet. Rather than splitting a fight into rounds, each opponent has 2 lives, similar to Killer Instinct. Even for the slowest characters, the moves seem designed to allow you to chain and combine to the next one quickly, and keep your momentum through the entire fight. A lot of the attacks can be interrupted, including the specials. There are 2 types of specials, ES and EX. ES specials are done pressing 2 buttons of the same attack type when executing a move. They're like supercharged versions of those character moves. EX specials can be dodged, but once you're hit, you can't interrupt it and their damage is extremely high. These are closer to those super special moves in later Capcom fighters like all the Versus series. Both use some of the gauge that builds up over the course of the fight, but I didn't find the combination for EX moves easy to pull off, so I often ended up using my special stock gauge on Dark Force, which you activate by pressing punch and kick of the same strength at the same time. Dark Force will change the background to indicate the character has activated it and will have some kind of special ability enhancing their attacks for a short amount of time. How this enhancement works depends on the character, as some definitely benefit more from Dark Force than others. If for whatever reason you think the game is still too slow, you can select a turbo option when choosing your character. This will speed up the pace of the fight based on the amount you set up in the options menu. You can also enable auto blocking if you really want. I haven't kept full track of what fighting game introduced what feature other than Street Fighter II accidentally introducing combos, but people credit the Darkstalkers series as a big influence on series like Guilty Gear and the sub-genre known as the anime fighter. There are a lot of aspects I couldn't learn to make a good use of, like guard cancelling or pursuit attacks. And you can chain long combos if you're good, but I could barely reach 4-hit combos without using any ES special that applied multiple hits on their own. You can perform certain grab moves mid-air, but I found that hard to pull off consistently since a lot of opponents thrive from countering aerial attacks. I'm not sure if this game introduced the concept of air dashes, but fighting game fans seem to think it did, and that's part of why it was so influential on anime fighters, aka air dashers. This game also made it popular to include convoluted mechanics like push block, which is supposed to let you push your opponent away as you block. The input and timing are very strict though, so I don't know how practical that will be on any level of play. I can't really show you any of those mechanics because I couldn't pull any of them off consistently. I think my only real complaint about the game is that there is no real training mode and you can't just do a simple versus mode against a computer opponent without selecting arcade mode. It's hard to go back to fighting games that don't have training modes where you can practice character moves. Especially in a Darkstalkers game. The games in the series are pretty hard against the computer. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying harder than any SNK fighting game, but definitely the hardest I've played out of Capcom fighters. Even on 2-star difficulty, if you don't get used to every single mechanic, the computer will just take control of the rhythm by the 5th match. Another feature that distinguishes this game from Capcom's other fighters is the music. It has some of that late 90s jazzy style that Capcom put into everything, but there's also a lot of fast tempo dance and instrument samples not commonly found in their other games that adds a mystic air to some of the music. Three composers worked on it, with Takayuki Iwai being among them. He composed for pretty much all of Capcom's CPS2 arcade games. Interestingly, this might be one of the first games to limit a lot of character themes to the victory dialogue instead of including those in the stages themselves, with a few exceptions like Dimitri's theme. While there are sung praises for the art style and animation, that's mostly the pixel art. The stage art looks simply awesome. The theme of the game allows for a lot of freedom in the choice for arenas, so every stage looks completely different. Some look relatively ordinary and some look super weird. each with all sorts of animations that add a supernatural touch, rich in detail. Now, a few don't have a lot of animations then, but still look impressive, like this one where you fight standing sideways in a building. The stage design makes you wonder what the lore behind each of them could be, and from what I hear, Darkstalkers lore is very extensive, but you only get it through read material side of the games. From what I hear, a lot of fighting game fans consider this one-off, if not the best console translation of the game, and one-off, if not the best 2D fighting game on the Saturn. By not playing well, I'm probably not doing a good job at showcasing why that is. My memories of playing this were foggier than I remember, because I soon found out the version I played was on the PlayStation, and this version was missing the custom character mode where you level up a character. But honestly, I don't think I care for that kind of constant fighting games anymore, so I don't miss it. I recommend this game to anyone, period. Anyone who doesn't despise fighting games will have a good time if they keep playing against a friend or try the arcade mode with a 1-star difficulty, which really is the only difficulty you can beat if you're a brainless bottom masher. The presentation alone is a good reason to play this game at least once. Absolutely no fighting game ever made was able to match its presentation harmony of style and quirk except for more recent Guilty Gear games, in my opinion. Now if this is the best game in terms of gameplay, I can't really say. But the gap between a casual player and someone who knows what they're doing seems very wide. The Empire Saver is part of Capcom's more recent fighting game collections. I'm pretty sure it's a straight port of the arcade too, so it wouldn't be a bad pick if you're interested. If you have a Sega Saturn, finding a copy of this game will not cost you a whole lot. Saturn games are never cheap, but Japanese imports tend to cost less than average if the games aren't super rare. When I checked quickly online, there was a complete copy in perfect condition for about $40, including shipping. Keep in mind I'm from Brazil, so the shipping fees from Japan are probably higher if you're from the US these days. You can also play this through alternate means these days, and the game runs fine. But really, if you need to go through that road, you might as well buy it from Capcom's newest collection. Though I heard Darkstalkers Resurrection is a pretty disappointing remaster, so I wouldn't recommend that one. Anyway, let us know in the comments how much you love Darkstalkers. We'd love to hear the thoughts of fans who are much more knowledgeable about what makes the series special. Maybe I'll learn a few things and do a retake in the future. And as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.